Mr. Admirable, thank you so much for taking the time to join us here on the War Room before your casting debut. How are you doing today, sir?
I'm doing pretty fantastic. I'm just always really excited to do any sort of content related stuff, especially when it comes to card games. I mean, card games have just been my entire life since as far as I can remember. So I'm stoked always to be here today to explain things because that is the second passion of mine.
The second passion of yours. Wait, what's the first passion then?
Card games.
The explaining is the second passion.
Correct.
I got it now. Fantastic. Getting to know you already. That's great. You did mention card games, so some people might be familiar with you with your time through Hearthstone. But for those of our fans out there who do not know you or aren't familiar with you, do you want to take a quick second and introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name's Nathan Zamora. You might know me better as Admirable or That's Admirable. If you don't, there you have it. I've basically been playing games my entire life, and it has been solely focused mostly around card games, though I have played stuff like Dota and League of Legends, the really popular games that all my friends tended to play. Really, the thing that kept me into card games, though, was the community aspect of it, and that in tournaments, even though these are like 1v1 competitive events, what you're doing is you're finding relationships within those, of people to practice with, or people to work with, or share ideas and bounce things off of. And what ends up happening is, despite the fact that it's this very sole individual competition, is that you end up getting these big community groups of stuff where people all collaborate with each other, despite the fact that they're directly competing with each other, which I've always found very interesting and very unintuitive. Kind of the same reason that cards have been interesting to me, is that a lot of the mechanisms and things you do tend to be counterintuitive to what you would normally think. And so I feel like that community appeal plus the mystery and to have it unveiled part of card games has really captured my interest and kept me involved.
I have asked that question a lot, and I have not always had it so eloquently put. So you mentioned that, sometimes it's kind of counterintuitive. Do you want to dive more into that? I'm really, really curious as to what you mean by that.
Yeah, so just from the community aspect, again, like the juxtaposition of it's a 1v1 competitive tournament, yet people are working in groups. That to me is just already its own thing. There's not really too much explanation that's needed there. But for card games, a lot of times it feels like just whatever the biggest and best card you can play is going to be the best thing you can play. But the real situation is that card games are very contextual and they're very situational. So a lot of times cards that are, I'd say, pound for pound, some of the worst cards available can be one of the best things you can do just simply because of the situation that you're in. And that's going to be different even if you play the exact same decks against each other over and over again. The situation that you arrive in is what's going to be driving that context of what the most powerful things are. And that's very unusual, I would say, to a game like chess, where your queen is just your best piece.
Right. And I think that's so interesting because you mentioned chess, and my thought process went immediately to poker, where you're sitting down across from somebody and everybody's playing with the same cards. But depending on the hand you're dealt, depending on the situation you're in, depending on what your read on your opponent is in, a lot of these card games, and I imagine if you've been playing them your whole life, you've probably done a lot of paper games as well, sitting across from your opponent. But
Oh,
when
yeah.
you're playing something digital, you don't get to, look in that person's eyes, but that doesn't mean you can't sort of establish their play style, their thought process, what might be in their hand. And to your point, yeah, maybe we slow play this one. Maybe we play something that's a little bit awkward and just see what happens.
Yeah, I think the poker is an excellent example that you provided, that where the ace is the best card in the deck, but sometimes the three is the best one, depending just on what game you're playing and how many threes you can come up with at that point. So I think it's an excellent example. And for the digital read and stuff like that, yeah, being able to discern players' play style versus a player's comfort level, they can definitely mean various things as well. So I think that's a pretty excellent point to make also.
So you talked a lot about, the tournament aspect, the community aspect, things like that. You've made more of a name for yourself as a caster. Has that always been the case where you want to participate in tournaments as well? Kind of where has the casting come from your background?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, and there's hopefully not as long of an explanation as I'm picturing in my head. I started playing cards when I was 11. It started with in 1996 when I started playing Magic, and that kind of just really captured my attention. And by the time I was 12, I had already made this decision that I am going to continue playing games the rest of my life. I don't care how I'm going to do it. I'm going to make a career out of this somehow, whether it's making the games, selling the games, trading the games, playing the games. I don't care what it was going to be. It was just going to be something with games. I decided that very, very young. And there's been very high highs and very low lows as a result of that path that I have chosen to follow. In 2000, I'd say late in 2013, throughout my late stages of high school and early on, once I had gotten out of high school, Theater was a thing that I had participated in. I took a lot of improv theater classes, and it just really wasn't for me. I felt like on the theater aspect, because a lot of it was just planned things. Even in the improv section of it, it felt like it was a little bit too planned, and there wasn't enough dynamic to it to me. Everything kind of had its very solid rundown of how you wanted it to progress. And so about 2013, when internet and esports stuff started becoming a lot more popular, especially for card games, that was really where I decided to pursue streaming stuff. And just the fact that I had vocally trained a lot, I tried to work in just vocal aspect of career for a long time. And the fact that I understood just how microphone stuff worked, and just my general experience with theater kind of really naturally led me down that progress for becoming a caster at some point. I got asked to cast one event, people really liked it, and so I kept continuously getting asked over and over again. And that's pretty much been my career for the last 7 years. But as far as the casting aspect of it goes, I feel like that having this passion for explaining things and storytelling, as well as having this passion for card games, just found this very serendipitous road that it kind of crossed, where it's like people want to see card games played, they want them in tournaments, and you need a talent to explain that sort of stuff. And it's like, wow, how did this fall together at this? This is so lucky. And that's, kind of like playing a card game. Sometimes you just draw the perfect card, and that's really what ended up happening.
But I really love that explanation. It's so interesting that you went from, the aspect of, well, I love cards, I love games. I kind of touched on this theater stuff, and then it all sort of fell together. I asked Flake the same question when I did the interview with him, and his path was very similar, except it was through radio. So he, at his college, was, the GM of the radio station, was doing radio stuff, did an internship. It wasn't quite the direction he was going to lead, but hey, I love cards, I love gaming, I'm streaming, and all of a sudden it just kind of all rolls together. So I think it's so interesting how those different aspects kind of just fall into place. People might look at a streamer, a caster, whatever the case may be, and go, oh, well, he just plays the game and he's good at the game, and here he is doing this job. But, there's more to it than just saying, I can read these cards and I can say what's happening. There's a lot more to it when you're, to your point, storytelling and that overarching piece around the game, the tournament, etc.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned the thing with Flake and with radio and how he got into it. I met Flake in Tour Stop Philadelphia a few years back, and we have kind of just kept in contact since then. And the more I've gotten to know Flake, the more I've realized that him and I have just had very similar paths of things, and enjoy like kind of the same stuff in terms of like entertainment and the card games we like to play, and just kind of the way that we like to have conversations. It's very, I'd say, odd how very similar we are, despite the fact that we're just colossally different in terms of like where we grew up and how we grew up and et cetera like that. I did work in radio for a little bit of time. I'm usually kind of embarrassed to talk about this because it was on a talk radio show in Houston at like 2 a.m. And the way that this radio show would go is I'm not going to name the name of it or anything like that. I'm just going to tell this story. He would have me come in the afternoon and record like 50 pretend call-in calls. Like he'd be like, we're going to take calls right now. And I'm like, man, it's 2 a.m. Who's calling in at 2 a.m. to this radio show to discuss these weird like conspiracy theory things that this guy's coming up with? And so he would have me record like 50 different call-ins, and then he would choose the ones he thought were best. And then he would argue with those call-in things and hang up on them disgustedly to try and prove his point that people that disagreed with him were insane and stupid. And I was just like, I can't do this anymore. This is so demeaning. And frankly, you're not even paying me that much. So I'm just going to quit that. And that was kind of really, honestly, I remember that point specifically because that really is what turned me into like, okay, I'm going to do card game stuff full time from this point, because working regular jobs it always felt like it was a little bit difficult for me. I always just had like a thirst and a hunger for something more and something that I personally loved.
It's actually funny. So make sure when you get a chance, ask Flake about his experience interning at a radio station if you haven't already asked him that, because while not exactly the same as yours, it kind of ended sort of the same way. So definitely a conversation you should have with him. And anybody out there, ask him about his experience in radio when he's streaming or something. It's a good story.
Point taken.
So you mentioned when you're talking about tournaments and you've got, let's say, teams preparing together, people preparing together, and it can create really interesting narratives. We've seen in the cards environment, Berto Burrito brought into the game with J King. J King kind of trained him, showed him the ropes, and recently we've had Berto kind of surpass the teacher and win a few games and win a few tournaments recently. So I think there is that aspect to it, the storytelling piece. If I go and compare, let's say, casting to that sports analogy, would you say you're more of that storyteller? Are you more of the play-by-play guy, more color commentary, the analyst? Where do you fit into that?
Yeah, it's so when I was casting with Hearthstone for a long time, it was mostly we did have roles I'd say that we were more situated to, and for me that definitely was analysis because I went from mostly being competitive in playing to casting the game. I think I was probably the first person to actually take that kind of direct route
Hmm.
where it was I tried to compete very actively. I got far in some tournaments, but as soon as I would get knocked out of those tournaments, the first thing that would happen is people would ask me to cast the events instead. And I'm like, oh, well, I guess I'll keep picking this up. Like this is still a way to, have some income going
Hmm.
from trying to play these games all the time. And so when I got into that, it definitely was an analyst role. But for card games, it's so much different than like say like I don't know, like a sports match. Like sports match have very very planned things that are happening.
Hmm.
A lot of times they're timed. Like you look at basketball, there's 4 quarters that go to it. There's a very clear offense and defense role if you are watching the game. It's this team has the ball, they're on their side of the court. With card games, that offense and defense role constantly shifts and changes, and sometimes the perception of who's the offense or who's the defense is not readily held by both players, let alone by people who are watching the game. Sometimes it's tough to discern who's ahead just when you can see both hands.
Hmm.
And so with card games, I felt like it's really had to train me to be open to the idea of what the discussion or the topic is going to be at that point. And I feel like it's both helped and hurt me. It's like a double-edged sword. In some situations, I feel like I've gotten stronger at casting because I can talk about a lot more topics. But at the same time, I don't necessarily feel like I've strengthened myself in one particular role. And I feel like this is pretty specific to card games, like maybe baseball, but baseball's basically like a real life card game.
Yes.
So with card games, I feel like we have this open role. I would tend to prefer a more analytical role because I feel like I can explain very difficult situations with fewer words than I would say are normally acceptable to explain some of
Hmm.
these situations. I try to compact it into one singular thought in case something else arrives very quickly afterwards. With players drawing cards every turn, that tends to happen. So I'd say analyst mainly, but card games very well rounded, and I feel like that's a strength that you have both as a competitive player, as an entertainer, or just even as someone watching it. Try not to pick one specific thing to look at. Try to look at a lot of different things, and try to tune yourself in with a bunch of other things. It's a good way to enjoy card games, to cast card games, to play card games. Card games are about being well rounded, jack of all trades.
For sure. And that way you don't put yourself in any kind of box either when it comes to an opportunity. Hey, we can bring Admirable in and he can do anything. We'll have him dance in the intermissions and he'll be all set.
I'll do this all.
Beauty. I know Flake's a big fan as well. So going into, let's say, a new environment like this, a new game, new casting partner, because I don't believe you and Flake have actually casted together before. How do you prepare for that?
There's a lot of different ways to prepare for it, and I'd say for me and Flake, mostly the preparation is just going to be the fact that we know each other. I think
Hmm.
that's probably one of the biggest preparations. We'll predetermine some generalized roles and things like that. I would say that one of the biggest things for me for coming into a casting prep though is just going to be depending on the work. And so for this particular event that Flake and I will be casting, you can find Flake at Watch Flake on Twitter or Twitch, by the way. We're going to be, casting this for a little bit longer than I would say I'm used to when I'm doing a big spectacle event where they get, pairs of casters and you have different roles and you have to do like little different jobs and you kind of rotate around. Vocal prep is going to be a lot of that because if my voice wears out throughout the day, what
Hmm.
that means is it's a lot harder to let myself be excited about things. It's a lot harder to control the way my vocal inflection works. So a lot of like breathing warm up that's coming into that event. Make sure I'm drinking a lot of water as I'm going through that day and leading through that day and such. But then also it's just being up to date with what the game is presenting,
Hmm.
understanding like who the players are, like trying to watch some of their games if I can and get attuned to their style. Because as much as people like to say that there are right and wrong things to do in card games, people definitely do have styles. That's kind of one of the traits of people and why storytelling's so interesting. There's always something about them
Yeah.
that just keeps coming up over and over again. So trying to understand a player's play style or just make sure that I'm in tune with it very quickly so that if I see it, I can identify it and perhaps find a line to talk about in something like that. Most of it is just being sharp and on point on that particular day. I'd say that's the biggest part of the prep.
I love that. And I'm really excited to see the two of you cast together because I think that aspect of storytelling and really diving into it with each character and each individual within this tournament is going to be a lot of fun. It is more than just so and so plays card X, moves to the front row. There's so much more to it when it comes to that storytelling piece. So I'm really, really excited to see more of that. While we're talking about casting, what advice would you have for any aspiring casters who are looking to, maybe move out of the tournament scene and kind of move towards a casting piece like you were talking about, or just in general looking to move to that broadcast style?
Yeah, it's definitely a tough question. when I kind of look at my life in particular, it's like, well, what did you do to get into casting? It's like, well, I dedicated my entire life from 12 years old into playing cards, pursued it very actively, regardless of feast or famine, and continued to pursue it relentlessly, knowing that if I continued to fail at it over and over again, I would just eventually starve and die. So don't do that part. But I would say that being able to actively work at it and address yourself. Don't ask other people what they think of your stuff. Watch and learn your own stuff and see how it is. Like, you've seen all the people on American Idol who sing and they do it terribly. Guaranteed those people do not record themselves, listen to it, and go, yeah, that's perfect. None of them did that. So when you listen to your own stuff, do that and judge it accordingly. Don't be harsh on the judgment, but be critical about it. Be sharp and on point with it. Pick up the things that you did that were interesting and try to flourish on that one particular element. If you find things that you're weak at doing, either improve them or get them out of the way. Then after that, do the one thing that I've always been afraid to do, which is ask. Anytime you see an opportunity anywhere, message those people and say, here's my resume. I want to cast. Here's what I've done. Here's the thing you can look at. Please consider me for the event. Thanks for your time. I have very rarely done that my entire life because I was raised in the notion that asking for help was a bad idea, but that working hard enough and then letting people offer you stuff was a better idea. That's incorrect. Ask people for stuff. I promise you they're not going to be that offended. And if they were, it's probably not someone you want to work with anyway.
I think that's a really good point, because I think so many people are taught, yeah, you know what, you work hard, you put in the time, and somebody's going to recognize you, somebody's going to find you. And when that was the case in a smaller type of world, sure, but when you've got the internet to pick from, it definitely changes things and changes the scope. Based on that, do you think, and I'm not to date you because I feel like we're about the same age, but you said you committed yourself from 12 years old, pre-internet even, to kind of get to where you are today. Do you think it is more difficult, easier, just different to kind of get into, let's say, a casting role today versus what it was for you a few years ago?
I would definitely say the internet makes pretty much everything easier except for keeping your privacy. Back when I was a wee lad, it was Netscape Navigator and dial-up at the library is what our choice for internet really was. And casting for games didn't really exist when I was that young. Again, it was 1997 is when I turned 12 years old. So we just didn't, esports stuff had just barely started getting born. I remember it was Joe Miller and D-Man 20 something years ago. They were producing, spectating, casting, everything was done on their own. And I've seen clips of Too Good falling asleep alongside Joe Miller just because they had been producing and casting event for so long, but then they just roll right through it. They're like, we got to keep going. The tournament's still going. That was the very young days of esports stuff happening. And since the internet has become such a broadly accepted tool for, basically everything now, it's just a great way to share information. It's definitely made it a lot easier, but it has made it more competitive as well. Right. So I'd say the talent that you need to have in order to step into that thing, it's definitely increased because you have a larger pool of people. But the way to get into that spot once you have that talent, not nearly as difficult. It's much easier to get a hold of people now.
Absolutely. Fair enough. So now I'm looking at you during this interview, and this might be a personal question because I might be a bit jealous, but how do you maintain that luscious beard? Sorry, completely out of left field. I'm just looking at you. I'm like, this is a nice, well put together thing.
For this particular one, I just don't do anything to it. This is the COVID haircut, and it's just I didn't even realize I was going to be on camera today. I was told I was going to be, but I didn't realize that I was going to be. So I should have just gotten my hair done, kind of coming into this. But usually when I'm taking care of it and I have to do it very actively, I do trim it myself. And then from there, it's just a lot of facial products that get piled onto everything to kind of make sure that my skin and my hair maintains quality of life. I'm turning 36 this year, and so I'm not getting any younger. It's time to start investing in these things that definitely work and putting them on my skin and letting them do its thing. Because if you don't, it gets very itchy otherwise, and I can't stand that. I have too much sensitivity to everything. If it's above 70, it's too hot, and if it's below 70, it's too cold. That's Fahrenheit, of course. But from there, it's mostly just making sure that I have quality organic products that I put on my skin because my skin's really sensitive to chemical stuff. So it's just mostly diligent use of facial products that keep everything in order.
I'm taking notes because top notch. Well, hey, you talked about the vocal bit before, but it is important as well that you do have to be on camera. You do have long days. You do have a lot going on. So being able to keep yourself in top shape for those performances, that casting is important as well, right? It's a full package.
Yeah. It definitely is. Like I should put more time into exercising and stuff. I mostly just do it for vocal and breathing exercises, but I definitely do want to like more physically exercise. When I first started casting, I was actually like pretty overweight. And I wasn't overweight by anything other than just my own consumption of calories, really. Like I've lost the weight and gained the weight several times throughout my life. I've been very poor at keeping it off. But recently, I'd say the last 2 years, I lost a bunch of weight leading into an event that was taking place in the Bahamas. It was just my wife and I, my now wife and I had just decided we want to get in better shape. So we started eating better and we started doing a little bit of exercise and we kind of kept control over that. And what I noticed was I was like, hey, I just look a lot better when I'm on camera this way. And I was like, wow, that seems to make a lot of sense. Like they say the camera adds 10 pounds. I say it adds more like 40. But, that just meant that I had to lose a little bit more even on top of that. So I've lost the weight. I've gained a little bit of it back, but I've kind of found this level where I've flattened out now. Like I'm not too overweight. I'm at a happy spot, and I think exercise would just balance that whole thing out. So I am in agreement with you on that. I don't think it's like super important to look good, but it is important to take care of yourself because it just helps you feel better. And when you feel better, you have more confidence. And when you have more confidence, you sound better. And when you sound better, people like listening.
Absolutely. And I think you hit it spot on. It's not around being perfect, but being comfortable and confident in who you are and how you are. And that absolutely translates when you're, talking to anybody and about anything. So going back to the beard piece, actually, because I'm not entirely obsessed, just a little bit. Would you say that the beard has become a bit of a calling card? It's very prominent in, a lot of your logos and things like that. Is it something you decided that was going to be a thing or it just kind of happened? Or am I just reading into this too much?
It probably a little bit too much, but it has become in some instances a big recognition point. So much to the so that more people I noticed, like my old colleagues, they would recognize when they had a beard that, oh, that's that Admirable guy. So they would omit the B themselves, despite the fact that the B was what they were focused on, the beard. And they would literally walk up to colleagues of mine and say my name. And similarly, I was experiencing the inverse as well. And I was like, I did notice that a lot of us just have beards now. Never really thought about this before. The reason I grew out a beard initially was because shaving just became so expensive for me. Like my beard grows at an astonishingly rapid rate. Like people call it like, oh, that's great genetics. You get a beard for it. I can't shave. I cannot do it. If I shave in the morning, 20 minutes later, I'll have a beard again. It's like Tim Allen in the Santa Claus. It just does not stop. And so that was the initial reason I grew it. And the first time I grew a beard, I just didn't take care of it at all. I just kind of like, I looked at myself one day. I was like, this probably could be cleaned up a little bit. And I was like, oh, it looks pretty sharp actually. I don't really mind this so much. So I've kind of just hung on to it at this point because I enjoy having one. But then B, it's not shaving. Shaving became painful for me literally because it was just my beard grows so fast and it's so like thick and weird at its root. I'm sorry, this sounds very personal and maybe TMI. But the point is, I've kept the beard around because I just think I look better with it. It looks like I may have a face and a jawline or a chin under here. I promise you, I have a severe case of cantaloupe head, where my head is perfectly spherical and round with just a little bit of texture stuff going on.
Fair enough. I mean, my head is a perfect cantaloupe. I don't know how to segue from that personally, but I can identify with you when you say that your beard grows very quickly. I once had a job where I had to have a completely clean shaven face. My first day at noon, they approached me and said, hey, you need to shave every day. I was like, I did this morning. Well then, so speaking of, the reason I ask about the beard is because for myself as well, the recognition point when I saw you casting Hearthstone was, he's the guy with the beard. That was just kind of where that came from. And then I learned that, well, that's Admirable. So to kind of segue over to your name, actually, where did that come from? Where does the handle Admirable or that's Admirable come from?
So this was years ago when season 1 of Game of Thrones came out, and I was just watching season 1 over and over again. And there's this one scene where Alistair Thorne kind of walks in on Jon Snow and why can't I remember his name now? Samwell Tarly, and they're just messing around in the mess hall, and he catches them. And he starts giving them this wacky speech about how they're not grown men and they don't know anything and they're not tough and they're not like him, Alistair Thorne. And he looks at Jon and he's like, was it uncomfortable in Winterfell? Where the days you just couldn't get warm, never mind how many fires your servants built. And Jon Snow is just pissed. He is looking at him and he's like, I build my own fires. And right when he says that, Alistair Thorne, it's like he just knew Jon Snow was going to say, I build my own fires. And he's like, oh, that's admirable. he's like, yeah, you idiot. Oh, yeah, real tough for you to build your own fires. Yeah, what a big man you are. Yeah. And I just thought it was the funniest thing in the world that Alistair Thorne it felt like he had planned this the entire time. And so that was part of my idea. But the real reason I picked it was because I was determined to become a professional gamer. So that inspired the name, but I was determined to have Artosis cast my name incorrectly one day. And the very first time, of course, that he's casting it, it's him and Doa. They're casting a match of mine playing cards. And Doa, as soon as he sees it, he goes, I'm sorry if you guys can't see anything different either, but all I can see is that sad Admirable, and I can't unsee it. So I'm sorry if you can't either. And I was like, they diffused it in 5 seconds! And that was part of what inspired me to also become a good caster, was the fact that they had taken this thing that I had found as a difficulty, saying that's admirable all in one word when referring to a single person, and just completely demolished that idea. And I was like, wow, just bravo. That is brilliant. I have to be that good one day.
I have to say that is a skill, though. It's so often a handle comes up and you're like, wait, what is that? Especially if you don't have the capital letters there, it can be confusing. I can understand that.
Yeah.
Before I let you go, I have the rapid fire section of questions here. So I've got 5 questions for you. You are allowed an answer and like 1 line of explanation max. So gotcha. I want to keep it simple. I want to keep it easy. What is your favorite topping on pizza?
Spicy Italian sausage. Spicy things are better than non-spicy things.
Amazing. Love that answer. If you could have dinner with one person, living or dead, who would it be?
Mark Twain.
Interesting. Fictional character. Same question.
Mark Twain.
Favorite band?
Oasis.
Lovely. And favorite TV show?
Lately, it's been Ted Lasso. Ted Lasso is the most positive person I've ever met, and it's very inspiring.
I've heard great things about it. I've heard great things. I have to check it out.
Watch it, definitely.
Wonderful. Will do. So that wraps it up. Admirable, thank you so much for hanging out. Where can people find you?
Super easy. @that's Admirable on everything. Type it in the Google, and that's how you find it.
I love how simple you have kept it. It makes it so much easier. But thanks again for joining us in the War Room. And Admirable, best of luck in your cast of Cards Blitz.
Thank you very much. Have a great day.